In the dark mist of chaotic Gotham, he is the crimson devil who brings blood, he is evil. In the bewildered mutant society, he is the third leader who emerged as a new force, and he is stubborn. In the endless entanglement between the shield and the snake, he is a cold sword that influences war, he is steadfast. He is worshipped, despised, praised, cursed, loved and hated by some. His heart is like a sharp blade in his hand, never hesitating, never wavering. Who can defeat such a person? Welcome in, the story of the king keywords of the novel. No pop-ups for the trajectory of the world's dominant characters in the anime world. Download the complete set of the trajectory of the world's dominant characters in the anime world. Latest chapters for reading the trajectory of the world's dominant characters in the anime world. 1, Chapter 1. I Have a Life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At night, Gotham Harbor is always like this, quiet, silent, and indescribable oppression. The day belongs to the successful, and the night belongs to the mice. Order and chaos have never appeared so clearly in the same place. If you are an old resident of Gotham, then you should have known a rule long ago. Don't run around at night. What you will lose is not just your wallet, but your first time, you may also lose your little life. This has never been a good place to live and work in peace, but there are people who come here with no way out. Etc. What I mean by desperate is literal. Wow, wow. The slightly dirty seawater splashed against the coast, adding a special feeling to the already deep night. A fish carefully swung its tail, wanting to flee to the sea to breathe some air. The weather tonight was very bad, probably it was going to rain. Suddenly, Poo-tong, the heavy object falling from the sky fell into the water, and the splashing water scared the poor fish to run towards the bottom of the sea. At the moment the heavy object hit the sea, cold seawater poured into his body through his nostrils, ears, and mouth, making him wake up from the terrible chaos the next moment. Cough cough. Damn it, where is this? The man wearing only pajamas struggled to maintain balance on the sea surface, trying hard not to sink into the water, but his still battered brain was unable to complete this action. In the end, he could only observe the surroundings while swimming towards the dark coast. In this not-so-warm weather, soaking in the cold seawater for 10 minutes, coupled with his thin and already soaked pajamas, when he landed, the exhausted man lay on the beach and didn't remember anymore. He gasped for breath as he looked at the sky above him with no stars shining, and then reached out to touch his chest. Yes, there were 3 burnt bullet holes on his pajamas, but where were the blood stains? What about the wound? The heart, which was supposed to have been broken, was still beating vigorously, and his thoughts became chaotic. In the end, he gave up thinking. Since these things that he had never believed before had already appeared. Let's accept them. Ha ha ha. The man who fell from the sky chuckled twice, then gestured towards the sky with his middle finger, got up from the beach, and casually threw the blood-soaked and bullet-riddled pajama into the sea. He walked step by step towards the still-lit light in the distance of the harbor, naked. After bidding farewell to the past, he walked wearily, perhaps with a hint of luck of escaping death. The Old Gun Bar, which was the busiest place in Gotham Port area 3 years ago, has gone unnoticed 3 years later. Of course, it's not because Christian's father's skills have declined, but because his stubborn father refused to take charge of the Russian mafia's friendship in this area. As a veteran, my dad doesn't allow any messy things to happen on his territory. This persistence once earned him a lot of praise, but now it has caused him trouble. Not all dock workers will insist on coming to my dad's place to drink under the threat of Jamie's henchmen. After all, it's just a glass of wine. There's no need to risk your life to drink it, right? Dad has been holding on for a month, and no one knows how long he can hold on. But according to Jamie's personality and his rules, if Dad continues to be tough, some bad things may happen. At 2 o'clock in the middle of the night, a heavy rain came crashing down on the window. Christian, with white hair and a tattered leather jacket, stood behind a somewhat shabby bar, wiping his glasses. These tasks were not supposed to be done by him, but 3 days ago, after the last guy left with his dad's $500 in the bar cabinet, he had to come by himself. 3 young people dressed in flashy outfits are sitting in the corner gambling, playing the cruelest dice game. You can't expect these kids who dropped out of school from a young age to play the high-end blackjack. They're not customers either, they're just being sent by Jamie to harass Dad's henchmen. This is just a small bar, with no music, no singers, no messy decorations, full of a retro flavor. And on stormy nights, no one is likely to come here, so Dad is planning to close the door in 10 minutes, maybe even using his old Springfield to drive away these little bastards. At this moment, ding-dang, the door of the bar was pushed open, and both the old man and the young thug looked up at the same time. Then they saw a strangely dressed guy walking in. He was a yellow person, wearing a dirty black hoodie on his upper body, which seemed to have been picked up from some garbage dump. He was simply wearing pajamas on his lower body, barefoot, and looked like a destitute wanderer. Dad instinctively wanted to scold him out, but the man lifted his head and glanced at the entire bar, not at Dad. Instead, he focused his attention on the 3 little thugs who had already started playing dice again. He smiled and strode over. Dad silently started wiping the glass again, and his other hand was placed on the wooden handle of old Springfield under the counter. He knew that smile, that's not the expression that should have appeared on the homeless man, but there's no need to say it out loud. After all, it's just Jamie's scumbag who's unlucky. When Christian's father changed into a lively expression, this dirty man also got involved with those flashy little thugs. "Hi guys, can I join you guys?" This guy rubbed his hands and showed a very interested expression. He spoke very fluent English with a hint of California accent, which should have been a good greeting rhythm. However, his dirty appearance and unpleasant smell gave him a serious score drop. The little thug with a green-colored head glanced at him, but without looking back, he refocused his attention on the dice in his hand and gave him a cold voice, "Get lost." The man wasn't angry, but continued to smile and say, "Don't do that, guys, give me a chance. My dice rolling skills are amazing." The green-haired thug was disturbed twice and became impatient, but just as he clenched his fist, a tall and thin young man sitting across from him, with his hair dyed gray-white, stopped his companion and looked at the uninvited man with a hint of mockery. "Do you want to join?" "Sure. But what do you use as a chip? You don't even have a penny on you, do you? So why don't you go back to the garbage dump and pick up hamburgers? That's where you should stay, ha ha ha." After speaking, the 3 thugs laughed at the same time, but the young man just shrugged his shoulders and casually pulled out the chair to sit on. His hands naturally rested on the table and said seriously, "You see, I am a healthy adult. I have hands, legs, and—" "Hi bastard, we're not interested in men." The last little thug with dyed red hair felt insulted. He impatiently slapped the table and shook the beer beside him, saying, "Especially you. Get out of here." Under the angry gaze of 3 people, the homeless man calmly spread out his hand and finished the second half of his sentence. "What I mean is, I have a life, I'll bet you guys with this thing, is it fair?" After this sentence was spoken, the whole bar fell silent. The 3 thugs couldn't speak, but they were not scared or shocked. Their first reaction was, "Is this guy crazy?" Subsequently, the second reaction was to be grateful. It's not easy to make a living under Jamie the boss. He often arranges some less important gang members to do some very dangerous things. Unfortunately, for these 3 guys, they belong to the less important peripheral members, otherwise they wouldn't be arranged at this time to threaten an unarmed old man. Unfortunately, 3 days later, there was a very dangerous transaction, and at this moment, a crazy person who seemed to not care about his own life came knocking on his door. Is there anything better than that? The 3 exchanged glances, and finally the guy with silver gray hair spoke up. He tried to make his expression more fierce, as if imitating Jamie the big shot. He lowered his voice, "Do you know what your sentence means?" "Ah-ha. The dirty young man shrugged, obviously knowing. Do you know the consequences of not keeping your promise? Last month, a guy who deceived us was thrown into Gotham Harbor and the body hasn't been found yet. Do you understand what I'm saying? Alright, there's no need to say more. Give me a pair of dice. If I lose, I will naturally do as you say. The young man casually leaned back on the chair, pointing to his nauseating hoodie and said, Look at my current state, do you think I will still be afraid of death? Okay. Cole, give him a pair of dice. The green-haired young man placed a pair of dice in front of him. He reached out and picked up the dice to look at it, then lifted his head and grinned brightly at the three little thugs. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, what's my name? Forget it, call me Saber, Saber. Hawk. No one wants to know your name, get started, trash. Cole mercilessly mocked and then began to shake the dice in his hand. The other two also started to shake. They played the simplest type, 3 dice, and the one with the smallest number gave money. Even a 3-year-old child could play it, but judging from the scattered bills and coins around them, these 3 guys played quite well. Saber likes such occasions, like such opponents, 3 dumbfounded youths, and most importantly, what he needs the most now. These 3 guys all have it in their hands, and it's still a rainy night outside with thunder. The only eyewitness is the old man who has been paying attention to this side. Fate favors me. Saber uttered a never-ending sentence, then reached out and picked up the dice in front of him along with the outer wooden box, smashing them onto the table. Before anyone else could react, Saber was the first to open the blocked box. 18.00, look, as I said, fate favors me. The 3 thugs were stunned and exchanged glances with each other. Then, they placed the 3 bills next to Saber and started shaking again. The second round began. Oh, it's 18.00 again, how lucky. In the third round, look, it's 18.00 again. I really had some bad luck, didn't I? In the fourth round, TSK, I don't even know what to say. Bang. Cole's fists hit the table, and he felt humiliated again. In a fit of anger, Cole wiped his left hand on his belt and then fiercely stabbed the table. A snowy dagger pierced Saber's hand, and the black handle was still trembling slightly. Cole stared at Saber like an enraged bull, cursing loudly, You're making a fool of yourself. Damn it. I'm going to kill you. Hey, calm down, buddy. Saber didn't even look at the dagger in his hand, but slowly picked up the money in front of him, stacked it together, and casually said, Your knife that hasn't seen blood can't harm anyone. It's like this at the gambling table, where there's a win when you lose. Instead of shouting at me, why don't you sit down and play a few more? Maybe you'll make a fortune, right? At this point, even a blind person could see that Saber was abnormal. Normal people wouldn't have no reaction to the dagger at hand, but they were at least Jamie's henchmen, so the self-defense was not just a dagger. So, when Saber lifted his head, a silver-colored metal hole pressed against his head. That's a gun. 2, Chapter 2. Money, Clothes, and Weapons. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The old gun bar, on this rainy night, the atmosphere was frozen to the extreme. The young man with gray-white hair had already stood up, holding a gun in his left hand and pointing it at the head of the uninvited Saber. Everyone present knew very well that this gun was not meant to scare people, there were really bullets inside, and Byrne really knew how to shoot. The missing person he mentioned earlier was not bragging. Although he didn't kill the person, he was at least an accomplice. You should know that there is a big difference between killing someone and not killing anyone. Saber looked up at the muzzle in front of him with a slight tremble, and the person holding the gun seemed a bit excited. No wonder, after all, he was just a young man with a hint of immaturity on his face, probably in his 20s, and an unshaven beard. What were you doing when you were in your 20s? Saber's eyes twitched for a moment, and then an indescribable headache surged into his brain, causing him to give up the idea of continuing his memories. The only thing that could be certain was that at that time, his hand holding a gun would not shake. "Hi. Bastard, don't cause trouble in my bar. Get out." Christian's father saw Byrne take out his gun and his heart tightened. He put down his glass and began to roar, but Burnley ignored him and just stared at Saber. Cole turned his head and cursed at his father. "Shut up. Old man, it's none of your business. You said Cole's knife can't harm you. What about this thing?" Byrne gritted his teeth and squeezed out a sentence. In order to strengthen the momentum of the sentence, he placed his finger on the trigger. He hoped to see a hint of expression on Saber's face, whether it was fear or anger. It would be best if it was a plea for mercy, which could make Byrne, who was not from a very good background, feel a special pleasure. But no. Saber's gaze remained unchanged. Facing Byrne, he leaned back in the chair, aimed the gun at his heart, and then whispered, "A gun. Not bad, not bad. This is actually a good weapon. As you know, a good weapon requires good maintenance to unleash its power and sharpness. Most importantly, you need to learn how to use it correctly." "What do you mean, bastard?" Cole punched Saber in the face, causing the young man's head to tilt to one side. When he lifted it up again, there was already a trace of blood stains. Saber moved his mouth and felt the familiar smell coming from his mouth, causing every cell and pore in his body to hiss and scream, but he had to suppress them. "It won't be needed soon. What I mean is, before shooting, you must first make sure you have opened the safety." This sentence changed Byrne's gaze, perhaps because he really didn't know it, or maybe because of some other messy thing. In short, his gaze turned to the revolver in his hand, and in less than a second, he realized that he had been fooled again because the gun that Jamie had given him had no insurance. Damn it. Bang! Before Byrne could finish his scolding, Saber, who had just been punched by Cole and had no reaction, was like a tiger that suddenly woke up. With his jumping body on one side, his left hand, like a pair of pliers, grabbed Byrne's absent-minded collar and pulled it down hard. The tremendous force from the collar made the young man scream in anger, but his body still involuntarily fell towards the table. Saber's other hand wiped the table, raised it high, and thrust it down hard. In the next moment, a cold light flashed by, blood splattered, and Byrne propped up his palm on the table, adding something more. Cole's dagger pierced through Byrne's palm in Saber's hand, piercing straight into the tabletop, but couldn't penetrate. "Ah ah!" The cries of pain, like that of an injured beast, echoed through the bar. Under the urging of pain, Byrne instinctively wanted to shoot, but he didn't have a weapon in his hand. "No more. It has been taken away. Bastards!" Cole rushed over from the side, clenched his fists, ready to teach the yellow man a lesson, but the next moment, accompanied by Saber's turn, a cold object pressed against his head, his damn face with an unchanged smile, and the bloodstain he had just punched at the corner of his mouth, looking a bit embarrassed. However, with his eyes facing each other, Cole's anger remained in his eyes, while Saber's eyes only had an expressionless expression, paired with that gentle smile, twisted. Absolute distortion. And as he had thought before, his hand holding the gun was very stable. Poor green-haired thug, his expression didn't even change in time, and then, bang, guns rang and people fell. Cole's shattered head lifted high, as if he had lost all support and fell backwards on the floor. Blood mixed with white matter, like a faucet opened by a mischievous child, spilled everywhere. Christian's father, who was constantly paying attention to this area, was also startled. He instinctively took out his old Springfield from the cabinet, aimed it at Saber, and shouted loudly, "Damn it! Put down the gun! Damn it!" Saber ignored his excited father at all, but with a hint of disgust on his face, he took off his black hoodie covered in blood and threw it aside. He was naked, wearing a ridiculous pair of pajamas completely soaked in seawater and rain, and turned his head to look at the last guy with red hair. The guy had just pulled the dagger out of his belt when he looked up and saw the whole process of Cole falling to the ground. The poor child was so scared that he stood still, even the ridiculous act of pulling the knife was stuck in the air. Saber glanced at him and then turned his gaze to Byrne, who was still howling incessantly. Blood flowed down his wound all over the table, and the pain made him not even notice the scene of his brother being beheaded. It wasn't until Saber wiped a little blood off his cheek with his finger, then wiped it off his clothes and wiped the blood off his finger. You know, shooting too close can lead to this problem. Saber complained, when bullets pass through the head, those things splatter everywhere, so I usually don't pursue this kind of precision too much. You know, to kill someone, hitting the heart is always easier than hitting the head. Did you hear what I said? The response to him was Byrne's howl of sorrow. Ah. Shit. Shit. I said, quiet. Ah. I'm going to kill you. Bastard. Saber shrugged his shoulders and turned his gaze to the last young man with red hair. The muzzle of the gun also shifted to Byrne's back, revealing a playful smile. Actually, you also find him annoying, don't you? He always gives orders to you like a big shot, even if he's not much different from you. You really want to teach this shitty guy a lesson, don't you? It's okay, don't be constrained. I know you want to do it too, I'll help you. No. I didn't. No. Bang! Another gunshot rang out, and warm liquid splattered on the face of the frightened little thug. His expression froze completely at this moment, while Saber breathed a sigh of relief and sniffed the bloody smell in the air. This restored a bit of his previously sleepy spirit from soaking in cold seawater. He moved his shoulder and threw the pistol with a hint of gunpowder on the table. He took the cigarette boxes of these three guys from the side, took one out, and set it on fire. Fur. I came here for three things: some money enough for me to have a meal, a weapon to protect me, and clothes that won't be disliked by others and can keep me warm in this damn weather. Saber sat in the chair, leaning back slightly, burying his face in the rising smoke, which made the outline of his face somewhat blurry. He placed his feet covered in mud and water stains on the table that was already filled with blood, but his eyes were tightly placed on the young man. He flicked his finger and said, "You understand what I mean, right?" The release of the Buddha was a command, as if it had reopened a switch on the body of this sluggish young man. He trembled and placed the dagger in his hand on the table, then quickly took off his black leather jacket and lined sweater, took off his pants and shoes, and finally placed them on the chair next to Saber, like a quail, wearing shorts and white socks, trembling in front of Saber, begging, "Don't kill me, please, I won't tell you what happened tonight, please. Don't kill me, for God's sake." Saber looked at the clothes and shoes at hand with a satisfied expression on his face. He nodded, spread out his hand, and muttered, "Don't do this, child. Look, I've put my gun aside. It's a friendly gesture, isn't it? All right, go home and be a good person, you know." I know. Thank you." The young man panicked and ran towards the door of the bar, wearing only a pair of floral shorts and socks. He stumbled, and if he stayed here for a second, he would be entangled in something terrifying. Saber didn't pay attention to him at all, but pinched the sweater with 2 fingers and carefully examined it to confirm that it wasn't too dirty before putting it on. And just as he put on his sweater, behind him, the young man had just run to the entrance of the bar. He opened his hands, his face filled with the joy of rebirth and the joy of escaping from hell, like a prisoner embracing freedom. Bang! The third gunshot fired, and a bullet from behind hit his back. His expression remained frozen in his face forever, and his body, which was running forward, fell to the ground and rolled forward twice, losing all vitality. It wasn't Saber who fired the gun, but as he was putting on his pants, his face remained expressionless, and all of this was within his expectations. A bar, 2 people, 3 corpses. In the slightly hot and humid air on a rainy night, the pungent smell of blood quickly spread everywhere, but no one spoke. Saber struggled to put his feet into shoes that were not very suitable, and then put the decent black leather jacket over the gray sweater. Finally, he patted his body and asked the Buddha to clean up the non-existent dust. After finishing all of this, he casually put away the change on the table, tossed a dozen coins up and down in his heart, and put the pistol with 4 remaining bullets in his pocket. He also pulled out the dagger that had been soaked in blood, wiped it on Burns' clothes, and found another 13 bullets in his pocket. Finally, he put the box of cigarettes that didn't smell very good into his pocket, wiped his hair, and turned to the bar. The shoes stained with blood left one eye-catching footprint after another on the ground. Christian's father had already thrown the old Springfield in his hand onto the bar counter, untied the first neatly fastened button, and sat there, watching Saber sitting outside the bar, propping his chin with both hands. The latter casually threw the coin in his hand onto the somewhat old wooden table, whispering softly, "Let's have a glass of wine, Dad. If there's anything to eat, I'll also have some by the way." Dad, who is already in his 70s, looked at him with wrinkles on his face, like an old lion. He didn't get up to get the wine, but asked a question, "In what name?" "Saber, drinking with me, this little money is not enough, and you just let go of a guy, it will cause me trouble. As an old man, I hate trouble." Saber took off the burnt cigarette butt from his mouth, pressed it out in the ashtray next to him, and exhaled his last breath of smoke, "But the trouble has already been resolved, you solved it yourself, so. In the name of friendship, have a glass of wine, Dad, and open the window again. The damn smell is really disgusting." Chapter 3. Dad's New Helper. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Saibwa finally got his beer and a plate of not too many pasta, which was a late night left for him by his father. The young people wolfed down the not-so-delicious food, while the old man started wiping his glass again. On the ground behind them, 3 corpses lay in different places. The old man opened the window, and the bloody smell in the small bar had already been swept away by the night air. In fact, it's hard to believe that a person who has never seen a bullet pierce through a human body can shed so much blood, like a small red pool, disgusting, pungent, and full of the smell of death. I feel like I've come back to life. Thank you, Dad. Saber picked up the tissue at hand, wiped his mouth, and then gulped down his beer. Finally, he smashed the empty glass onto the table and let out a pleasant moan. "Another drink." "No, you just brutally shot and killed 2 people in my territory just for some change. You are a real villain, wearing clothes pulled from the dead, like a complete villain. Look at your eyes, you have no remorse at all." Christian's father's eyes flashed with a hint of disgust. Although he said nothing, he still turned around and picked up a large glass of beer for Saber. With a rude expression, he cursed, "After drinking this glass, get out of here. By the way, dispose of the body before leaving. I don't want Jamie that scumbag to trouble me." "Jamie." Saber's hand lightly tapped on the handle of the cold wine glass, his voice carrying a hint of fatigue. Everything that had happened before was stuck in his mind, making him look a bit chaotic now and making him eager to sleep. He yawned and picked up the glass, saying casually, "That's not a very good name, it sounds like a fag." "Yeah, Jamie, the boss of this area, the scumbag of the Russian mafia, ruthless, is a ruthless character. Among the 10 missing people in this area, at least 7 are related to him. Guess who his new enemy is?" Dad said with a malicious smile on his lips. Saber turned his head to look at the 3 corpses, then tilted his head to look at his father. "So these black devil bastards with disgusting tattoos on their arms are under that fag's command. This quality is too poor, isn't it? Even an old man who can blow them down can do it." This malicious answer made Dad snort coldly, and he turned his face away from the sneering Saber. "Has anyone ever told you that when you speak, you're like a real jerk?" "Many people have said so." Saber's face, buried in the smoke, flashed a hint of complexity. Finally, he flicked his finger and said, "Forget it, talking to you old man is really boring. After asking the last few questions, I left. It's also fair for me to solve these troubles for you, isn't it?" "Hey. Young man, the last trouble was me taking care of. Dad knocked on the table very displeased, then took out a cigarette from Saber's cigarette box, took a puff, and then forcefully extinguished it. Pooh, that's what women smoke. And why do you say they're my trouble? Maybe they're my guests. After finishing speaking, the old man took out a pipe from the counter, similar to a corn pipe in the style of MacArthur. After lighting it, a spicy taste stirred up Saber's confused spirit. He casually extinguished the cigarette but in his hand, picked up a coin, and kept jumping and playing with it on his fingers while saying, at 2 o'clock in the middle of the night, 3 tattooed thugs, armed, sat in a bar with only one old man. This bar was located on the nearest street by the port, and there were night shift workers at the dock. Your place, which should have been bustling with business, was so deserted, so should I continue to talk? Dad let out a deep laugh, and the rain outside the window seemed to get heavier. It patted against the window, and the old-fashioned ceiling fan above his head creaked. He took a puff of smoke, and a red light lit up at the top of his pipe. Amidst the smoke, he spoke, a smart person. There aren't many people like Gotham anymore. Ask me, what do you want to know? Where is this place? What time is it now? Dad looked at Saber with his head lowered in surprise and said loudly, this is Gotham. You should have come from another city, right? This is not a good place, right now. The old man looked back at the hanging clock on the wall and said, at 2:37 p.m. No, what country is this? What date is today? Forget it, give me a copy of today's newspaper. Before Saber could finish speaking, he saw the newspaper placed by his father at the bar. He reached out and opened it, benefiting from his previous knowledge. English was not difficult for him, but the first bold word that came into view made Saber frown. Bruce Wayne resurrected. Gotham's son disappeared for 7 years and finally returned. Cantoni, the 22-year-old son of the tycoon, take on the big responsibility after the functional division of Stark Group is completed. During the California riots, radical mutant groups demanded that Congress face up to the discrimination faced by mutants. Below the last news, there is also a super large color picture, which shows a young man with open arms and spitting flames. Beside him, ordinary people are fleeing everywhere in a miserable state. Saber's gaze quickly turned to the upper right corner of the newspaper, where a black moment lingered, and the Buddha mocked his hindsight. July 13, 2000. This is really a bad day. Watching Saber suddenly fall silent, Christian's father didn't know how to continue the conversation. However, a few seconds later, Saber looked up again at his father and asked him a question that made him laugh and cry. He pointed to the bold news in the newspaper and the handsome young man with sunglasses on the picture, and asked with some confusion, is this Wayne Industries famous locally? And who is this young man? Dad looked at Saber like he was looking at an alien, and he took off his pipe. You don't even know this. It looks like you really came from some remote place. Shouldn't you have stolen it? Stop joking, okay? Saber's eyes rolled over and he could tell that he was really not in a good mood now. After pondering for a moment, his father spoke up happily, that young man is Bruce Wayne, the successor of Wayne Industries, which is Gotham's largest conglomerate. More than 1/10 of Gotham people rely on it to make a living. No one in Gotham doesn't know him. He went missing 7 years ago, and we all thought he was dead, but we didn't expect him to come back. He was an authentic playboy, a socialite, and had hosted several banquets as soon as he returned. He was a very energetic and generous young man. How can we say? He's almost my boss. Saber's eyes flickered and he heard his father continue to tidy up his glass while saying, Jamie, that son of a bitch, thought I would hold on to the end and become a sacrifice for his power. No, I'm not that foolish yet. This bar is very valuable. I've always known that, so I need to find a decent successor for my old buddy. Bruce Wayne is quite good, isn't he? His company is about to go public, and they want to start restoring the business of Gotham Harbor. They need a vibrant port, and if they want to have vitality, there is always a place for leisure. As he spoke, Dad proudly picked up his pipe again and chatted confidently with a stranger he had just met for less than an hour. Jamie never imagined that he thought he was just standing in front of an elderly man, but 3 days later, he would realize how wrong he was. He was against the wealthiest playboy in Gotham, and those big shots only needed to move their fingers. His proud gang would disappear, so he knew that he was just a wild dog picking up food in a garbage dump. Fur. The father, who was getting more and more excited as he spoke, leaned back on the chair and reached out to untie his second button, revealing a corner of his tattoo on his chest. "I'm old and can't hold a gun, but not any wild dog can grab a piece of meat from me. Everyone thought I would lose, I would die, but they don't know why I stood up for a month. I'm not someone who won't fight back." When he heard his father spit out his second cigarette ring, Saber's fingers tapped on the bar counter. He looked up at his father, who was also staring at him. "You don't have to say so much to a stranger of unknown origin, so let's be honest. What do you need me to do? And what can I get? For the sake of this glass of wine, I think we can work together again, just like before." "Ha ha ha, you villain who earns money from the dead." Dad leaned down and propped himself up on the table with his left hand. "Fortunately, when I was young, I was the same. But when I got old, they had to deal with me like a bullet. You're right, Jamie's patience has come to an end. If it weren't for you tonight, it would probably be me who fell to the ground. My recent colleague stole $500 from me and ran away, so for the last 3 days and the days of contract transfer, I need a new helper who can fight and be ruthless to stand with me. As for what you can get, let me think about it." Christian's father tapped his finger on his forehead. $10,000 plus an identity that allows you to integrate into Gotham. You should know that although the security in this haunted place is very poor, although gangs run rampant, and although more than 10 people die every day, it is already rotten, but it is still orderly. At least on the surface, there is order. One identity can save you a lot of trouble, especially for you, a thoroughly organized mafia. Oh, it sounds like a good place. Saber didn't murmur a word, his fingers kept bouncing on the somewhat dilapidated bar, and finally he reached out a finger and shook it in front of his eyes. "With one identity and an additional $50,000, I can guarantee that even a fly won't get close to you. You know, Dad, your life is very valuable, isn't it? And there are people everywhere who can fight, but someone like me who is ruthless is not easy to find. Ha ha ha, you are indeed a down-to-earth villain." Dad stood up, took out a string of keys from the bar and threw them to Saber, then said meaningfully, "Gotham will be heaven for you. Now, get rid of those disgusting corpses for me. Then go to sleep on the 3rd floor and start work at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And I hope you can truly be a smart person, Saber. At least until Jamie is killed, we'll be together. Remember this." Saber took the key and scratched his head. "Is there a rope here?" "Boss, and how do you usually handle these things?" "My previous habit was to tie stones and throw them into the sea, and it was easy and enjoyable." "Oh, that's a coincidence, so are we." Chapter 4. Waves at the onset of a storm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Despite his father's scolding, he ultimately drove his old pickup truck, carrying the bodies of 1 and 3 jerks, towards Gotham Harbor in the late-night rain. It's not that Saber doesn't know how to drive, nor is it that he can't handle such a small scene alone. It's just because the environment of Gotham Harbor is too dangerous for an outsider, and this weather is most suitable for some covert trading. Dad can't want his hard-won helper to sleep under the sea of Gotham without any reason. Saber is indeed very capable of playing, but in this era, it is no longer an era where just playing can solve problems. The rainy night of this season is a bit cold, especially when standing on the windy dock. Saber removed 3 large black pockets from the car and found some heavy stones nearby. He wrapped them neatly with wire and then, under the gaze of his father sitting in the car, pushed those three things into the sea. There was no moon on the rainy night, so nothing sad about what had just happened except God and these two people knew. Next, kid. Dad's hand reached out of the car window and threw a cigar to Saber, who held it in his mouth and struggled to light it in the rain. The thick smoke floated around him, enveloping his upper body in the smoke of this rainy night. The mellow smoke drifted in the somewhat cold night around Saber, and in the flicker of the cigar, chaotic thinking once again involuntarily fell into memories of the past. The fragmented memories may not be due to this confused journey, but because life was once fragmented. Saber vaguely remembers opening envelopes time and time again, with various names written on them, including English, Chinese, and some distorted words. That was once his goal, and it was also his life. He used guns, knives, hands, ropes, and traps to make those who shouldn't have survived accept their rightful ending, but at that time, he was probably not a bad person in the traditional sense. Because in that memory, there were still scenes of him taking the oath and the heavy mission. He travels from one city to another, from one country to another, from one continent to another. His life is never dominated by himself, and his circle is pale and terrifying. There is no friendship, no love, no family. What is it like? That kind of life, weapons. Saber silently recited the word that had jumped into his mind, and then he vigorously shook his already wet hair. Yes, live like a weapon, without even thinking, focus on your own tasks, focus on killing. Like a snake living in the darkness, or a fierce dog, all it needs to do is sharpen its teeth. It has adapted to this kind of life, but why did it break it? Saber struggled to endure the increasingly intense headache, and his body seemed unwilling to let him recall too many things, but these were already enough. The last image that flashed through his mind was him wearing pajamas, blocking a scene in front of a child holding a plush doll. It seemed to be a city in this country, and he was probably on a mission. On the street outside the hotel, bullets flew towards him like light and shadow. He closed his eyes and knew he was going to die. There is an afterlife. Living for oneself. That was probably his last sentence from his previous life, but ironically, if his biological clock hadn't gone wrong, it should have been what he said 2 hours ago. As a result, fate was so magical, perhaps because he had killed and saved people in his previous life. So at the last moment, the gods and Buddhas in the sky gave him a chance. Saber disdainfully exhaled 2 wisps of smoke from his nostrils, then gestured his middle finger towards the sky. He never believed in God. But he thought that sentence was fantastic. He turned around, holding a cigar that was already halfway burned, leaned against the cold railing, lowered his head in the heavy rain, feeling the increasingly violent raindrops falling. He looked at his hands, watched the rain wet it, and slowly clenched his fist in the falling raindrops. In this lifetime, live for yourself. Quang Long, a flash of lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the dimly lit Gotham harbor at this moment. Dad was mesmerized as he looked down at Saber walking in the heavy rain, and at the moment when the lightning pierced through the sky, illuminating everything. Only Saber's figure was as dark as ink in the light. It looks very cool. Saber stayed in the rain for a whole 5 minutes before returning to the car in a disheveled state. Dad started the car and curiously looked at Saber, who was leaning his head against the window. He whispered, "What were you doing just now?" Saibwa, who was originally very talkative, remained silent at this moment until he answered the old gun bar again and walked into the creaking wooden door. He then threw his cigarette but fiercely towards the rainy night outside the door, and then grinned at his father, showing an overflowing smile. "I'm saying goodbye." Dad looked at Saber like he was looking at a lunatic, then stuffed the mop into his palm and pointed to the floor covered in blood footprints. "Great, you're a passionate villain, so clean up this place for me and go to bed. There's food in the fridge on the 2nd floor. Remember, tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Jamie may come and cause trouble." Christian, the veteran, put a wristband around Saber's neck and gave him a hard squeeze, which was probably his way of expressing goodwill. Then Saber heard his father suppress his anger, teach them a good lesson, let me see if you are truly capable, or if you only know how to bully those little hooligans. Saber's face immediately turned into a bitter gourd. He looked at his father and said, well, it's not good to kill during the day, is it? Dad's gaze at this moment was really like looking at a lunatic. He cursed and let go of Saber's neck. The way to solve the problem is not just to kill. You crazy person, Jamie may be a bit difficult to deal with, but his subordinates are just some incompetent fools. 3 days. I only need 3 days. Do you understand? After speaking, Dad yawned and walked up towards the second floor, leaving only an empty small bar and Saber cleaning inside. When there was no one around, the chatter became quiet, and he hummed some kind of music and began to enjoy his work. He seems to be very meticulous in any job, even squatting on the ground and vigorously wiping with a cloth to remove a blood stain. So by the time he finishes cleaning thoroughly, the hands of the clock have already pointed to 4:30, the true midnight. Saber's body was shaking a bit. He locked the door, walked up the stairs, took a big red sausage from the refrigerator on the second floor, chewed it, and went up to the third floor. He opened the door of the room closest to the window and didn't look at the layout around him. He took off his soaked jacket in the darkness, threw it aside, and then collapsed on the bed. Quickly, a uniform snoring sound began. At the same time, in the darkness of this rainy night, in a mansion not far from the dock, 2 bald men were gathered together to discuss matters. The room was beautifully decorated and luxurious, but on the table was a stack of photos and a pistol placed on the photo. Next to it was an open bottle of vodka, a high-precision drink that most people keep a distance from. But it's the thing that Russians love the most. The shortest bald man picked up the first photo and looked at it in front of him. It was a woman with brown hair and a gentle smile. Looking at the photo, a slightly hazy grin appeared in the bald man's drunken eyes. Tisk tisk, she's such a beautiful little girl. What's her name? Rachel Dawes, assistant local prosecutor. Another bald man picked up vodka and took a sip. His collar was open, revealing his strong muscles and lush chest hair. He murmured, she is a tricky little beauty who doesn't like money and is not afraid of threats. Moreover, at the bottom of Shafalconi's boss, he asked us to create some accidents. Boshkin, it's up to you. The short bald head shook its head and snorted, okay, the security in Gotham is getting worse and worse. These righteous figures may encounter some accidents when commuting to and from work. Those poor beggars on the narrow island who have no food to eat are willing to exchange their lives for money. The matter of a bullet is like the Wayne couple back then. Speaking of which, a short bald man named Boshkin casually threw the photo aside. He looked at his boss and lowered his voice. Big brother, Bruce Wayne, who died 7 years ago, has returned. I heard that his company is also planning to buy the entire Gotham Harbor. Do you think he will? After all, 7 years ago, Falcone asked you to kill Zeely outside of court. Upon hearing Boshkin's question, Jamie's bottle stopped for a moment. He took a deep breath and placed the bottle on the table, then sneered, Master Bruce should be grateful to me. I helped him kill his father's murderer. Besides, it was Falcone who asked me to do it. But what you said makes sense. Jamie closed his eyes and pondered for a few minutes before his body straightened up from the sofa and hooked his finger towards Boshkin. Isn't that old and immortal Christian planning to sell his store? Don't worry, big brother. I have already sent Byrne and his team to handle. Boshkin licked his lips and said, it's just a bad old man, but I don't understand, big brother. What do we want from that rundown bar? What do you know? Jamie glared at his younger brother, but he quickly explained, Wayne Industries has already calculated to revitalize Gotham Port. Once the port thrives again, there will be a place to find fun. That bad old man won't do business, let's do it. Find some women and get a batch of goods from Falcone's boss, not more than we earned by fighting and killing. Bashkin, our brothers have come all the way from Siberia to the United States, and we're not here to sacrifice our lives for anyone. Once Bruce Wayne and Falcone meet up, it's time for us to reap the rewards. Wait, no matter who it is, don't try to take Gotham Port from me. 5, Chapter 5. The Meddlesome, Good Son. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next morning, Bashkin, the leader of the Russian mafia, walked out of his room rubbing his head with a hangover. However, before he could finish a sumptuous breakfast, his younger brother came over and told him some bad news. What? Byrne's missing. Bastard. Bashkin punched the table and roared at his little brother, where can Byrne and the others go last night with such heavy rain? It must be related to that old bastard Christian. The more he thought about it, the more angry he became, and then he thought about what Jamie the boss had said to him last night. Bashkin's face suddenly showed a hint of iconic grimace. You guys come with me, let's go kill that old bastard. After a moment, a black SUV drove out of the mansion and headed towards the old gun bar. The weather after rain is always sunny, with a hint of warmth and fragrance that washes everything. Saber opened his eyes in the direct sunlight and looked at the height of the sunlight. Conservatively speaking, it must have been over 9 o'clock. This guy sat up from the bed and saw a stack of neatly arranged clothes on the opposite table at first glance. It was old clothes, but they were washed very clean. Obviously, it was Dad who left it here. Saber grinned, and after 5 minutes, he finished grooming and changed into new clothes. Saber walked down from the 3rd floor. The bar is very quiet, and this is not the bustling time for this retro-style bar. Coupled with Jamie's recent events, it is still a deserted place. Dad sits behind the bar, playing outdated songs that Saber is not interested in on a radio, playing a few cards in his hand, looking quite self-entertaining. Saber is a very discerning person. Watching his father enjoy time, he didn't bother him. Instead, he casually found a table, sat on a chair, and held the dagger he received last night in his hand. He played his own game in boredom, with the blade in his palm and the Buddha butterfly piercing the flower, which was dazzling. This dangerous game requires a great deal of energy and is obviously a good way to pass the time. And the boring time is always brief. When the clock on the wall pointed towards 11:15, a black SUV appeared in a rampage at the entrance of the old gun bar. The car door opened, and a strong man with only a black sports vest and a shaved head walked out of the car with 3 guys who were dressed similarly to last night, but had a more mischievous temperament. He rudely kicked open the wooden door of the bar and walked into it with a fierce aura. The vibrating sound made Saber, who was immersed in his own game, suddenly come to his senses, while the strong man didn't even look at him. Instead, he strode to the front of the bar and fiercely punched the wooden table, interrupting his father's self-entertainment. Old dog, where have the 3 of Byrne gone? The voice of the strong man was filled with anger and irritability. Obviously, he was a guy who didn't suppress his emotions very much. Their first reaction to any problem was to use their fists to solve it. For ordinary people, it may be a big problem, but for real villains, this kind of opponent is actually their favorite. Dad, do you need any help? Saber's voice almost followed the strong man's cursing, which naturally attracted fire to his father. The strong man turned his head to look at Saber, as if looking at a pile of garbage, but he ignored Saber. Instead, he turned his head back to his father leaning on the chair. Where did Byrne and the others go? Tell me. Who knows, Bashkin, aren't they your subordinates? We all know that Gotham has people missing every day, or is it that Jamie Dollion's own subordinates can't handle it well? Dad picked up his pipe, hugged his chest with both hands, and raised his chair slightly back. His voice was filled with mockery. If I had to say it, maybe those 3 bastards thought Gotham was too dangerous and went somewhere else to pursue a better life. For example, heaven. Well, maybe it's hell. Saibwa continued, as if singing a duet with his fearless father, but his voice carried a hint of impatience and playfulness. This tone directly ignited the strong man's anger. He suddenly turned his head, pushed away his subordinates who looked like background behind him, and strode toward Saber. Bashkin looked at him from above, his bloodshot eyes filled with malice. He extended a finger and pointed it to Saber's chest. "Tell me, monkey, what did you mean by that sentence you just said?" Saber tilted his head to look at him. As he was sitting in a chair, the tall Bashkin in front of him looked like a mountain. However, Bashkin's grin had not dissipated yet. Saber's left hand suddenly grabbed the finger that Bashkin was holding down on his chest and pushed it in the opposite direction. Bashkin's body bent downward under the sudden pain, but this instinctive protective measure failed to prevent the misfortune he suffered. "Click and wipe, your parents haven't taught you before, shouldn't you use vulgar language casually?" Ah! The pain of his finger being broken instantly spread to every nerve in his brain, 10 fingers connected to the heart. It is said that this pain was second only to egg shattering in childbirth. This sudden attack even made Bashkin completely unresponsive and he knelt down on the ground. When the heart-wrenching pain arrived, the Siberian gangster's eyes were filled with darkness, but as soon as his mournful cries came out of his throat, he felt his bald head being held in place by his hands, and a rapidly approaching knee approached him. Bang! This hit the bridge of his nose, and the blood sprayed onto Saber's new pants, which made him somewhat dissatisfied. He picked up the thick glass ashtray on the table and swung it round towards the swaying bright bald head. Bang! By KO. The strong man fell to the ground, blood flowing out from the back of his head, looking particularly eerie and bloody. Of course, in order not to cause trouble for himself and his father, Saber controlled his strength and was just unconscious. Maybe it would also be accompanied by a concussion or something. Anyway, this guy who eats cholesterol to exercise his muscles probably doesn't lack money, so it doesn't matter. It's really disgusting. Saber looked disdainfully at the ashtray stained with blood and his new pants in his hand. He stood up from the chair and kicked the unconscious man in the face, kicking him out and rolling him several times. The guy who had just hurt someone stretched his body, waved his hand, and threw the ashtray with a slight crack into the trash can. He wiped his left hand on his belt, and a dagger shining with cold light fell into his palm. The butterfly spun around in his hand like a flower, and Saber raised his head and grinned at the few who were standing still. He walked quickly towards the 3 guys, with fresh blood dripping from a few fingers on his right hand and a dagger in his left hand. This posture, combined with the momentum that almost instantly killed the strong man, made the 3 gang members who had followed Bashkin a long time scared. However, they were at least the older brothers of Jamie, and in terms of courage, they were much stronger than those young people like Byrne. The tallest guy also took out a dagger from his pocket, let out a scream, and rushed toward Saber, with his brothers following behind him. Ah! Shit, it's meaningless. Saber swung his left foot outward, his whole body turned to one side, and with a gentle hook on his right foot, the first person who rushed towards him lost his balance. However, as he stumbled, Saber's right hand held onto his body, accompanied by the sound of a dagger piercing his abdomen. He flew up again and kicked the second person who rushed towards him in the middle, causing his body to stumble, and he covered his stomach and lay on the ground. Blood dripped down the left hand holding the knife onto the ground, and with a push from Saber's right hand, the frightened and foolish guy was thrown onto the ground, holding his stomach and starting to howl. "Mark, Ollie, come and save me, I got stabbed. I'm bleeding, I'm dying. Come and save me." This guy's voice was very harsh, so Saber gave him another kick, kicked out a few teeth, and the howl turned into a low, pitiful scream. "Don't look at me like that, guys, I'm not crazy." Saber opened his arms, holding a blood-stained dagger in one hand and blood dripping from his fingers in the other. Paired with his innocent face, he was a living lunatic wielding a knife. But he didn't lie. He pressed his thumb against the blade and only pierced a third of it. Apart from bleeding a little, he wouldn't get hurt at all. However, the last remaining subordinate had never seen such a ruthless person who would open his mind at a word of disagreement and even poke a guy with his hand. When Saber's gaze turned to him, this guy trembled and raised his hands. He thought he had been robbed, but in reality, they were the ones who really came to find fault, and they even planned to take Dad's life. Unfortunately, they didn't have the chance. But at that moment, a piercing siren suddenly sounded at the entrance of the bar. In less than a minute, a young police officer wearing a detective hat and only wearing a blue shirt rushed into the bar with his left hand pressing on the gun holster and his right hand holding the gun handle. But there was no such confrontation as the young man had imagined, and everything seemed normal. His respected father was sitting at the bar reading a newspaper, a young yellow man was bored sitting on the other side playing with a coin in his hand, a black vest burly man lying in a pool of blood, unaware of his life or death, a person rolling on the ground, a black man holding his stomach and groaning on the ground, and finally a trembling bastard. He held a bloody dagger in his left hand and a bloody ashtray in his right hand. It looks like internal strife within a gang. Squat down. Hold your head. Bastard, throw away the weapon in your hand. The police officer instinctively felt that something was wrong. He cautiously stroked the handle of the gun and loudly scolded the trembling guy, who was gentle like a lamb. He immediately threw away the bloody guy in his hand and crouched in the corner, holding his head. The young police officer breathed a sigh of relief before moving his hand away from the gun handle and turning his gaze to his father. The expression on his face became more enriched, as if he were seeing his family. "Hi Dad, I heard about what happened at the bar and I'm late. You know, I've been attending police training in Star City lately and I just came back. Is everything okay here?" Dad put down the newspaper, and a happy smile appeared on his wrinkled old face. Then, he passionately gave the young police officer a hug and patted his back hard. "Just come back, my good son. Everything is fine with the bar and me. Come on, I'll introduce you." Then the police officer's gaze fell on Saber, who was curiously looking at him with his head propped up in his right hand. But the next moment, he pulled out his pistol in a standard and swift posture and aimed it at Saber. "Don't move. Raise your hands." Saber twisted his head for some unknown reason, then saw his right hand supporting his head. He patted his head and let out a frustrated moan. On his right hand, there was still a trace of blood that had not been wiped clean, which was obviously the reason why this exceptionally sensitive police officer noticed it. They are fighting internally, interning as police officers. I am a truly good person. If you don't believe me, ask Dad. He can testify. Don't talk. Raise your hands. It's really been too long without playing, my hands are all raw. Saber murmured, but there was no intention of raising his hand. He even casually spread out his hand towards the police officer, leaning against the chair as if he had no bones. There was no more ferocity than before, and even when pointed at by a gun, he was still in the mood to joke. But you know what? A person who likes to meddle in things hates it the most. 6, Chapter 6. An Idealist. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 5 minutes later, two still active guys scurried away from the bar, carrying their seriously injured boss and unlucky companions. Before leaving, they had left all their money and weapons, so Saber had an extra $700, 2 daggers, a handgun that seemed to have been used for a long time, and a magazine full of bullets. Saber stood at the door waving goodbye to the spotless black SUV, then blew a whistle and said to his father and the young police officer sitting opposite him, "Jamie is good to his subordinates. You can even get a gun for this kind of thing. TSK TSK TSK, this treatment is really amazing." The police officer's face was very solemn. "That's Jamie's brother Boshkin. It said they're real brothers. You almost killed Boshkin, Jamie won't give up easily." Regarding this, Saber shrugged. Obviously, Dad didn't tell this guy about the bar sale, but since the misunderstanding has been resolved, Saber won't have any conflict with the police officer who spoke coldly to him. At least everyone is an adult now, isn't it? Due to the early return of the father's obedient son, the old man specifically closed early today, saying that he would personally cook to entertain his son. When the old man was busy, the bored Cyber sat at the table of the bar with this young and handsome police officer, staring big and small. I said, Robin, don't look at me like a criminal. I'm just protecting my dad's safety. He hired me, and I have to help him clean the bar and tidy up those damn glasses. Saber propped his chin with his left hand, playing with the coins in his hand, and said to Robin, the handsome young police officer with short black hair, actually, I helped him solve a few problems last night. Look, we're a team, do you understand? Call me John. Thank you. Robin, with a cold expression on his face, placed his hands on the table. He looked at Saber's right hand and saw that the bloodstains on it had not yet been cleaned. Detective Robin was a young man with very keen senses, otherwise he wouldn't have become a police officer at a young age. In the words of the intern's superior, Sheriff Gordon, Robin is a born criminal terminator. And now, even across a table, this sharp criminal terminator can smell the bloody smell on the young man named Saberhawk in front of him. Even stronger than the murderers in Blackwater Prison. This is a truly ruthless character. He should not be unknown in Gotham, and more importantly, someone like him should not appear by Dad's side, especially when he is now at odds with Jamie. Okay, let's have a frank conversation, Robin. Saber put down his left hand supporting his chin and spread his hands out on the table, speaking in a very sincere voice, I really won't cause any trouble, do you understand? At least until my dad pays me the salary I deserve and clearly states that he doesn't need my help, I won't cause any trouble for you or him. This is your territory, and I'm just a poor temporary resident. After my dad gets rich, I will leave and go to the city center to find a job as a cleaner or a dishwasher. I will live a life of idleness, and we won't have any interaction in the future. Okay, Robin's reaction to this was, I will keep an eye on you. It's best for you to do as you say, otherwise I don't mind throwing you into prison, or even worse, Dr. Klein's Arkham Hospital. I heard it's all your kind. For this threat, Saber shrugged. He didn't know what Akam's crazy home meant yet. On the contrary, his interest quickly shifted to Robin. He had always been familiar with carrying his chair and sitting next to Robin, ignoring the sharp sound of the chair rubbing against the floor. He asked in a sneaky low voice, I'm actually very curious. Dad said your name is Robin, but I just saw that your police officer ID clearly says, John Blake, and you're only 19 years old this year. Normally, children at this age should still be in school, but you're already an intern police officer for Gotham. So, would you be interested in explaining it to me? Robin, I know Daddy has some background, but I hope you can tell me something. Well, what I should know. Faced with Saber's approach, which was such a sensitive matter, Robin clearly had no interest in answering. However, it didn't matter if he didn't answer. Saber was like a machine gun, constantly speculating, let's play a guessing game. Well, you're definitely not Dad's biological son, unless this old man is strong enough to be able to have children at almost 60 years old. So considering your current situation, I guess you should be an orphan. The surname Blake, including the silly name John, should have been given to you by your foster parents, and your real name is Robin. Upon hearing Saber's guess, Robin's left hand on the table clenched into a fist at this moment. Saber knew that he had guessed correctly, which did not make him more proud. On the contrary, he frowned and stood up, hugging his arms, and stroking his chin with his thumb. Then he walked around Robin, muttering, Dad is not your foster parents, but he calls you a good son. You also have feelings similar to a father towards him. Obviously, there is a story when you met him, and I cannot guess the specific story, but I think it should be related to abuse and running away from home. So after encountering Dad with good luck, you have to work hard to prove yourself. Now it seems that you are probably influenced by the other side of Dad. What you pursue is some kind of justice. Want to become a righteous person, or an idealist, you hope there is no crime in this world, or do you make your own efforts to end crime? Do I guess right? Robin's fist clenched even tighter, but the next moment, he breathed a sigh of relief and whispered, Why do you think so? Saber chuckled and stopped talking. At the same moment, the old man in an apron walked over with 2 plates of cut beef, greeting Robin and Saber to serve food together. This interrupted the friendly communication between Saber and Robin, but it didn't matter. Saber had already collected all the information he needed. While his father was holding Robin's hand for a pre-dinner prayer, Saber held a glass of wine with a playful smile and looked at Robin sitting across from him. This young man was extraordinary, with a special talent for sharp senses and agile posture, but he wouldn't have any impact on his life, so he didn't pose a threat. Well, without any threat, it means you can become friends. However, what made Saber both frustrated and novel was that during meals, the communication between his father and his obedient son was about things he didn't understand, such as Star City, mutants, superheroes, and so on. Saber skillfully ate the meat cutlet with a knife and fork, while propping his ears to gather the information he needed from their conversation. Soon, he realized that this unfamiliar world seemed to really have superpowers, magic, and other things, and there seemed to be a strange creature called mutants active all over the world. They were like humans, but they possessed all kinds of superpowers. Finally, about superheroes, it is said that they are a group of volunteer police, who use their own strength to help the city in order to make society better. Correspondingly, they are a group of people called super-criminals. In short, after listening to these tedious conversations, Saber's first reaction was, "This is really not my past world anymore." He can be certain that in his original world, it is impossible to have any superheroes or super-criminals, let alone those mutants like superpowers. In this world, various super-criminals are rampant, and there are radical mutants living around them, ready to make big news at any time. There are also some countries that he is completely unaware of where they are at war, and the whole world looks like a chaotic and disorderly state. Finally, Saber summarized and came to a tragic conclusion. It seems that for an ordinary person like him, it is better to casually find a job that does not require a brain and live a life of mediocrity. To be honest, this sumptuous dinner was very boring because Dad always talks to Robin about things that Saber is not interested in. However, even a jerk like Saber can feel a unique relationship between these two people, maybe that thing is called family affection. This made Saber, who was running the carriage in his mind, feel a hint of jealousy. But it quickly disappeared without a trace. He picked up a newspaper and collected all the useful information for himself, occasionally turning his head to look outside the bar. He never forgot his duty, nor did he forget why his father hired him. Fortunately, it seems very quiet tonight, except for some drunkards sitting nearby drinking. Well, the dots of light they emit from smoking represent that they have been there for 2 hours. Saibwa's lips curved into a smile, and he probably had some fun tonight. "Alright, Dad, I'm going back to the police station. Mr. Gordon has put a lot of cases on hold, and Falcone almost bribed everyone at the station. It's really bad. Tomorrow I have to deal with that damn Klein, that always collects money to handle things. There's a lot going on there, and I have to go back and get busy, Dad." The detective, who had drunk a few glasses, picked up his hat from the table and hugged his father. Then, wary and with a hint of warning, he glanced at Saber, who was buried in the newspaper and didn't even look at him. Dad escorted his obedient son outside the door, and a few minutes later, Saber heard the sound of the Mustang police car engine starting. Then, Dad hummed a song and walked back to the bar, starting to tidy up the dishes on the table. Saber turned around to look out the window, and the red light spot that had just faintly lit up had disappeared. He put down the newspaper and a playful smile spread from the corner of his mouth. "Dad, you love your good son very much, I can tell." Dad was holding his corn chip pipe in his mouth, looking down at Saber and snorting through his nostrils. "So what? My good son has a bright future, he's much stronger than you, the villain." Saber made a face at Christian's father and pointed out the window. 2 hours ago, there were 5 drunkards sitting there, and after your obedient son left, all the drunkards were gone. Do you understand what I mean?" Bang! Dad's glass fell to the ground, causing him to freeze for a moment before looking at Saber with a gloomy expression on his face. "Why didn't you say it earlier?" Saber showed an innocent expression and said, "You didn't ask me again." "Enough. Hurry up and help. Did I hire you to watch the fun? You go first, I'll come later." Saber shrugged his shoulders and didn't get up. Instead, he placed the two guns in his pocket on the table. He looked innocently at his father and then at the two civilian defense firearms. "I swear to God, I really want to go, Dad, but with these two toy guns, I guess I can only bury poor Robin. You know, this thing is over 30 meters long and can't even pierce his arm. Damn it." Dad turned around and lay on his bar, flipped his hands for a few seconds, then threw a wooden box to Saber, who opened it and blew a whistle. "M9, I like this thing, but unfortunately there's only one. That is a silver-white, streamlined handgun with a slightly protruding barrel and a black handle, which is clearly well maintained by the user. Under the slightly dim light of the bar, it shines with a hazy and cold light." Saber held it in his hand and withdrew from the magazine, which was filled with brass bullets. Kaka, the murder weapon, spun around in Saber's hand before disappearing into his pocket. He opened the door, gestured okay to his father, and then flashed away into the darkness. He was wearing his father's old clothes, his black coat fluttering backwards in the still chilly night. Saber ran slowly forward, and the street in front of him looked a bit blurry under the dim streetlights, giving Saber a special sense of sight. At some point in the past, it seemed like he was running in the dark. What was he going to do at that time? Are you going to kill someone? It seems so. Although past memories are like fragments with no pattern, there is always a mixture of scattered blood and coldness between those fragments. With guns, knives, and hands, how many people did he kill? Are there idealists like Robin among those people? Is there a guy like Dad who makes a living in the gray area? Is there a guy like myself with a chaotic past? The heavy senses pressed on Saber's shoulders, and at this moment, it even made him gasp for breath. His footsteps couldn't help but slow down, but when he looked up again, he saw completely different scenery around him and in his memory, and his brain suddenly shook. Yes, this is not the past world anymore. This is a new world. Yes, so let bygones be bygones and have a new life for yourself. After taking care of my father's employment, I will be truly free in 2 days. When the time comes, I will go wherever I want. Hey, bastard. Aren't you very arrogant? Come on, hit me. A violent shout, combined with the sound of a heavy object hitting the human body, woke Saber up from his imagination of future life. He suddenly stopped and walked towards the corner without making a sound. He looked not far from the street light ahead, at the Mustang police car that had been forced to stop, the broken windows, the stained glass, and the young man who had fallen to the ground surrounded by 5 guys. Saber licked his lips and casually wiped his belt under his coat. 2 daggers fell into his hand, and he took a deep breath. The cold air entered his lungs, causing his blood to start flowing again. Hee, my dear son Robin. You owe me once. 7, Chapter 7. Night Standoff. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Time returned 3 minutes ago. Under the night, Gotham Harbor is not a safe place. Not only does Dad know this, but Robin knows it better. He even has a piece of intelligence in his hands. There is a drug X transaction in the loading and unloading area of the harbor, but he cannot break in and catch those guys. Mr. Gordon said this is fishing for big fish, but Robin knows the troubles of the honest sheriff. I dare not. My strength is far inferior. A long time ago, before Robin was born, the port area was no longer under the jurisdiction of Gotham Police. Over a decade, there were more than a dozen bosses who quickly changed, and in the end, it fell into the hands of Gotham's mafia family Falcone. Jamie, who threatened his father to sell taverns at low prices, and his mafia were just Falcone's dogs. Although Robin hoped to bring justice with his own hands, He knew that the police were powerless to provoke old gang families like the Falcone family. They were even as old as Gotham's history, and most importantly, Falcone bribed over 2/3 of the city's high-ranking officials. This place was like his kingdom. However, Robin was also fortunate that compared to other big cities, Gotham had not yet seen those super criminals that ordinary people could hardly deal with. Although Falcone was despicable, at least they still followed the rules on the surface, but they were only superficial rules. This city has rotted to the bone. Robin murmured to himself. Being caught up in thought is a state that requires attention, so when Robin noticed a pickup truck rushing out of the intersection ahead, he instinctively slammed on the brakes, causing his car to make a nearly 90-degree turn on the road. Z. Bang! Robin's head hit the steering wheel, and he lifted his head in a daze. A black shadow roared and smashed into his car window from under the light. Bang! He was hit hard by a baseball bat, and the car window immediately cracked. Before he could react, Luo Ning unbuckled his seatbelt and slammed the bat into the front window with a loud noise. Luo Bing instinctively blocked himself with his arms, but the next moment, a hand reached into the shattered car window and forcefully grabbed Robin's shoulder, pulling him out of his seat and throwing him to the ground. Damn it! As soon as Luo Bing pulled out his pistol, a baseball bat hit him and flew the pistol away. Robin's arms also made a clicking sound, and there were also young people's cries of pain. However, the next moment, a leather boot stepped on his chest, which almost made Robin suffocate. Bang, bang, bang! These thugs mercilessly smashed Robin's body with baseball bats and other objects. In just a few seconds, a puddle of blood appeared under Robin, who had curled up his body. They came with the intention of killing. Come on. Bastard. Aren't you very imposing? Come on, hit me. Catch me. Bastard. The guy wearing an ugly mask kicked Robin in the abdomen with his feet and shouted loudly, like a crazy person who had been drugged. In fact, he had indeed entered a state of ecstasy due to drugs. A young and promising police officer was struggling and stealing under his feet, and he personally defeated him. This feeling made this bad guy from the slum extremely happy. But just as he raised his baseball bat with bloodstains in his hand, intending to give this guy a hard blow, a voice awakened him from that madness. Hi, guys. Stop fighting. If you fight again, you'll end up dead. The masked guy suddenly turned around and saw a yellow man wearing a black coat walking towards them. His hands were hanging low beside him, his head lowered, and he looked like an ordinary person walking out for a walk, neither tall nor powerful. Get out of here. It's not your business here. The thug turned around and deflected the baseball bat held above his head, about to smash it, but the uninvited guy shouted again, lying there is my friend, and I said, can we? Bang! The irritable villain's baseball bat slammed fiercely on the hood of the Mustang police car, making a loud noise. His patience with this foolish, interrupting his execution had reached its limit. He impatiently turned around and walked towards Cyber, his baseball bat constantly hitting the carriage, looking like an irritable gorilla. I said. Let you go. Didn't you hear me? Are you trying to show off your authority, Do you want to show off your authority in front of us? The black thug, who was about 1.8 meters tall, approached Saber. The young man, who was 1.7 meters tall, looked like a thin and weak rookie in front of this muscular man. His companions also stopped beating Robin, who was on the brink of unconsciousness, and stood aside to watch the show. The distance between the two sides was about 15 meters, and Saber lowered his lips with a smile. When the strong man was 5 meters away from him, he lifted his head. No, I don't want to show off my authority, I just. Oh, my goodness, you're so ugly. You're saying. Whoosh! Before the irritable burly man could finish his words, Saber's left hand shook away and the sound of breaking the wind sounded. A cold blade bloomed in his eyes under his mask, but in the blink of an eye, the sharp blade pierced into his soft throat. The pain of his trachea being cut made him cover his neck with both hands. At this moment, all the strength quickly slipped away from his robust body. He was confused and wanted to grab something, but in the end, he could only weakly kneel on the ground, unable to breathe, and the life that had slipped away from his body with blood made him feel the coldness of death. But Saber was no longer looking at him. At the moment his body hit the ground, Saber had already started running quickly. When the thugs saw their brothers fall, they roared and rushed toward Saber. Another guy took out some threatening weapon from his pocket. In the next moment, a sharp blade pierced through his palm, only a dozen meters away. The speed of the flying knife thrown out was definitely not slow, and it was difficult for someone without professional training to avoid it. When the villain who was stuck in place was holding the pierced palm and howling, the M9 in Saber's hand had already pressed against the head of the guy at the forefront of the charge. That guy felt the coldness on his forehead, and the baseball bat he had already swung dared not fall anymore, so he could only throw it on the ground. The remaining two guys reacted quite quickly, grabbing Robin from the ground and pointing his pistol at his head, shouting at Saber, "Smash! Bastard! Let go of him. Otherwise we'll kill him. This is your friend, isn't it?" Saber didn't answer immediately, but looked at the guy in front of him who was holding his head against him. His body was trembling with fear, obviously. In this scene, Saber had an inexplicable feeling. His muzzle was pressed against the guy's forehead, then he pressed down. The guy's body also followed the movement of the muzzle and eventually knelt on the ground. "Turn around, buddy." Saber whispered that sentence, and the guy hesitated for a moment. He saw Saber's fingers open the safety of the pistol and pull the hammer back. His gaze saw the strongest Bill's lifeless body, and he decisively hesitated. He lowered his head, knelt on the ground, turned around, and without any guidance, held his hands behind his head, looking like the poor bugs about to be executed on the Afghan battlefield. "Hi guys, look, I also have hostages." Saber waved his right hand in the air and then made a gesture of spreading his hand. His pistol slid over the poor creature's head, causing its body to tremble more frequently. "Tell me, who is your boss? And who made you attack the great Officer Robin?" "Shit. Who would answer your damn question?" A guy wearing a wild dog mask grabbed Robin's neck with his arm and roared at Saber. The poor police officer's face was covered in blood, and his blue shirt was almost stained red with dust and blood. He was weak and almost unconscious, but his mind was still clear. In the movement of the wild dog man's arm, he realized that something had turned around. He struggled to open his eyes, and his whole body was in pain. He saw the bastard next to his father pointing a gun at a masked, kneeling guy on the ground, and not far behind him lay a corpse under the street light. This bastard killed again. The thought flashed through Robin's mind, and then he saw Saber's left eye beating at a fixed frequency, as if blinking. However, Robin understood the meaning of this guy and struggled to make an okay gesture with his still moving left hand. Saber saw it and immediately this guy shouted loudly, "Look at you." This sound startled the two still active thugs. "Look at you bastards, scumbags, you look like a bunch of crazy wild dogs, barking wildly to prove your bravery, but not even daring to say your own dog's nest is there. Hey. Then I'll guess, Jamie that fag asked you to come, right?" No one answered, but Saber didn't need to answer either. He just needed to constantly attract the attention of these two fools. He took a slight step back, and the muzzle of his gun pointed towards the back of the poor creature kneeling on the ground. "Oh, it seems I guessed it right, Jamie. That coward who only hides in the dark and lets others do dirty work. He asked you to come and cause trouble, but have you ever thought about it? Once something happens, once Gotham Police Station gets serious, your Jamie boss will only throw you out as scapegoats. Look at you, a group of mentally disabled people, they don't even know this truth." Saber paused for a moment. "All right, now let go of my friend, as you can see, he is a noble police officer. As long as you let go of him, we can treat him as if nothing had happened. I am an honest person, and I can swear in my father's name that I will not reveal it. The thug wearing a wild dog mask seemed to be angered, waving his pistol and shouting loudly, "Who the hell needs your guarantee? If you kill Bill, Jamie boss won't let you go. You and your damn tavern won't let either of them go. He will punish you." Punishment. Do you mean? Like this? Saber placed his finger on the trigger and tilted his head to look at the two people across from him. At the moment when his words fell to the ground and their eyes turned, he didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. Bang. 8, Chapter 8. Gunfire noise. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bang, the sound of gunfire rang out, and the poor creature kneeling on the ground shook for a moment, then collapsed weakly on the ground. Blood flowed out of his chest and slowly spread on the ground. This decisive shot stunned the two guys across from him. The wild dog man who was holding Robin immediately planned to shoot and kill Robin, and then fight to the death with Saber. But just as he pulled the trigger, Robin's left hand pushed his arm up from below, and the scorching bullet flashed over the officer's head, followed by 2 gunshots. The bullet that flew out of the muzzle accurately hit the chest of the wild dog man holding Robin 15 meters away, and another bullet hit the guy who had already raised his gun and aimed in less than a second, opening a hole in his heart. Robin felt a scorching liquid spurting out of his ear, and then the body of the thug holding him collapsed weakly to the ground. The weak police officer also fell to the ground, breathing rapidly. After experiencing a life-and-death battle, his whole body was in pain, and he felt that he was really going to die at this moment. "Hi. Robin, wake up, you bastard. I'm not here to see you off. Wake up." A powerful arm lifted the police officer from the bloodstain, and Saber fixed his soft and obedient son with his arm. He patted Robin's face, and the officer's eyes were almost out of focus. This was a symptom of excessive blood loss. At the same time, 2 shining car lights came from the darkness behind, followed by a hurried stop. Saber covered his eyes with his arm, half kneeling on the ground, supporting Robin with one hand and holding M9 emitting gun smoke with the other. "Robin. Robin, what's wrong with you? Oh my goodness." Dad ran to Saber and Robin and snatched Robin from Saber's hand. The old man looked at his good son and then looked around at the 4 corpses. With a complex expression, he patted Saber's shoulder and threw a key to him. "You go back to the tavern first, I'll take Robin to the hospital. Don't worry, I'll make it clear to Gordon and stay there with peace of mind." After speaking, Dad ran towards his pickup truck with the completely unconscious police officer in his arms. Saber watched as the car started at a speed of 80 miles and rushed towards the nearest hospital in the port before disappearing under the streetlights. The young man breathed a sigh of relief. Although he was not familiar with Robin, he at least helped his father a favor, which made him feel a sense of peace of mind. He reached out and took a look at the gun in the wild dog man's hand, snorted, and casually threw it aside. "Cheap garbage." He cursed, then stood up, took out the cigar he had previously received from his father from his pocket, lit it, took a deep breath of smoke, and then strode to the garbage bin on the street corner. He took off the plastic gloves he had on his hand for eating pizza, and threw the slippery gloves covered in blood into it. He vomited a cigarette ring, turned around and glanced at the bloody interface, then hummed a tune and walked into the darkness. 2 minutes later, a hasty cough came from under the battered Mustang police car. It was the thug who had been stabbed in the palm. He had taken off his goat mask from his face. It was a thin and weak black man, holding his pierced palm but not daring to make a sound. Just now, he witnessed the entire massacre of Saber. He crawled out of the car, curled up in a ball, and looked at his deceased brother. The extreme fear flooded out of his heart, causing his stomach to spasm and spit out the beer he had drunk before the violence began. His nose and tears welled up, and he suppressed himself from crying, as if the demon of the yellow race was still staying nearby. After another 2 minutes, he struggled to stand up with his hands in his hands and stumbled towards the other side of the street. However, just as he entered the darkness, the cold muzzle of his gun pressed against his forehead. "Do you think I forgot about you? Little goat." "No, I didn't." "No, please. Please. Give me a chance. Please." He had a runny nose and tears streaming down his face, looking extremely pitiful, but when Saber across from him raised his eyebrows, just as he thought there was still a chance, his finger on the trigger twitched slightly. "Bang, when you tried hard to kill Robin, you didn't give him a chance." Saber looked at the fallen body with no movement in his eyes. He thought he was doing harm to the people. Well, he just killed a few thugs who were joking with their lives. In Gotham, this is completely insignificant, isn't it? But just as he turned around to leave, Saber suddenly turned back and looked up at the rooftop on the other side, which was a 5-story small building. He felt someone peering at him, but perhaps it was just an illusion, because when he looked over, there was nothing there. "Well, I guess I'm feeling a little nervous," Saber muttered to himself and then walked into the darkness, where only the cold wind that had been removed at night blew past the rooftop. 5 minutes later, the flickering light of the cigar in the darkness flashed away, followed by the sound of gradually fading footsteps. He's really a vigilant guy, someone who kills without blinking an eye. The dark shadow protruded from the edge of the rooftop, revealing a strong man dressed in an unusually strange outfit. He was wearing black, strange armor that didn't look like metal, and a wide black cloak. The most peculiar thing was that he wore a black helmet that looked like a bat, with 2 horns protruding, and a black strap tied around his waist. He looked at the figure of Saber leaving, and beneath the bat helmet, there were a pair of indifferent eyes. "It looks like a bat with its arms folded in the darkness, even darker than the dark night sky." He quietly arrived here when Saber rescued Robin. The combination of an injured police officer and a cold-blooded assassin clearly caught his curiosity, but then Saber shuttled through the darkness, harvesting the last villain's actions, which plunged him into a subtle sense of familiarity. The places he has stayed, the places he has traveled, the places he has integrated and exited. When did such a person appear at Gotham Wharf after killing 5 people cruelly and ruthlessly? The strong man stood still, letting the night wind blow through his cloak, revealing a flowing black cloud in the darkness. After a moment, he seemed to have made up his mind. Control violence with violence. Bring fear with violence. After weighing for a moment, he began running along the area of the top floor without making any sound. However, just as he was about to jump, a faint sound appeared in his earbuds. The movements of the big bat stopped, and his arms extended to both sides, silently stopping at the edge of the stairs. "Falcone." The dark guard shook his head, turned around, quickly charged in another direction, and then leaped forward. The soft black cloak behind him, like gauze, suddenly expanded at the moment he fell to the ground, supported by his outstretched arms, like 2 open dragon wings in the wind, carrying him silently towards the dock area. Just like a real black bat, silent, precise, and deadly. There is a huge drug X transaction going on there, and he has been following them for a long time. It was the biggest operation of the Falcone gang recently, and it has been going on for a long time. He feels like he is getting closer to the truth. Regarding the guy who threatened him with a gun 7 years ago and truly opened the door to his other world. The biggest cancer in Gotham City in his eyes, he wants to get rid of him. He swears to get rid of him. Because of his parents, because of everything he has experienced, endured, and abandoned. He has gone through countless hardships, and he has made a vow to change this chaotic city that is no longer hopeful. He wants to change his hometown. 10 minutes later, Saber walked into the room on the 3rd floor of the old gun bar by the window. He stood by the window, watching the cold night outside. He reached out and took off his coat, sat on the chair by the window, picked up the raw beef taken from the refrigerator, cut it open with a small knife, and put it into his mouth one by one. He was very hungry. There was a special hunger in his body that he had never felt before. He felt every muscle and cell in his body crazily devouring the beef he had just swallowed. A large piece of beef was eaten up in less than 3 minutes, and then he picked up the big red intestine at his hand, tearing and chewing it in big bites. I'm exhausted. Saber finished a piece of red sausage, patted his stomach with satisfaction, then walked into the bathroom, took a comfortable hot bath, and quickly fell into a chaotic and shattered dream on the bed. However, within 2 minutes, a violent gunshot rang from the dock outside the bar. Saber was instantly awakened, his eyes suddenly opened, and his body bounced off the bed like a spring, like a shadow lying by the window. The silver pistol was already in his hand, and he looked out. In the distant dock area, some of the lights had been extinguished, but the tail flames of the bullets were like flowers blooming in the darkness. This sudden noise pierced through the tranquility of darkness. At this moment, it looks a bit fun. Saber picked up the coat still stained with blood and sniffled in disgust, but still put it on. In such a dark night, wearing a white shirt was not a good idea. He flipped through his father's counter, put the left wheel he had taken from the previous thug in his pocket, and then walked out of the bar and quickly towards the battle zone. Saber is not a lunatic, and if necessary, he would not be willing to approach a battlefield that could be hit by stray bullets at any time. However, the firepower here is too poor, and he urgently needs something powerful. Not only because of his father's employment, Robin's situation has already been told to him. Gotham, this city with deteriorating public security, is a bit too dangerous. If he doesn't want to endure it, he must find a way to sharpen his teeth. Let him witness the smell of bleeding before others harm him. And brave people have always had good luck. Just as Saber approached the battle zone, a fat man wearing a brown jacket ran towards him panting. Saber's eyes lit up, and the panicked fat man in his hand looked like a good thing. At least it's much better than the revolver toy in his hand that grinds the rifling quickly. Hi friend, where are you going? 9, Chapter 9. K.O. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fraser felt that his luck had been terrible lately. This slovenly chubby guy is a standard garbage cowboy, inheriting all the shortcomings of the red-necked ones. Rudeness, arrogance, greed, and binge eating. However, if there are any other advantages to him, well, he's a bit of a self-righteous little clever. Fuzz was not the first sheriff to accept Falcone's bribe, but he was definitely the one who had the deepest cooperation with Falcone. He refused to accept the money offered by Falcone and used his position to cover up the illegal transactions of the largest gang leader in Gotham. He called it legitimate gray income, but of course, Fuzz was not worried about being exposed because the entire Gotham police station, except for his partner, Gordon, who had a bad temper and a hard temper, was bought by Falcone's money attack. Or rather, the leader of the gang in the dark world of Gotham has already bribed most of the city's high-ranking officials, and Fraz is just a small pawn among them, but it is the most useful one. However, today, as usual, Fraz went to Gotham Dock after work to cover up for Falcone's trade. It is said that this was Falcone's last recent trade, but just as this last trade was about to be completed, a jerk appeared. A cross-dressing maniac dressed like a madman descended from the sky and knocked down 13 retired soldiers hired by Falcone in just 1 minute. It didn't seem like a person, like a monster, like a black bat. Fraz did not have the consciousness to sacrifice for Falcone. He had taken a lot of money from that guy, but that money was not enough to buy his life, so he saw the situation and fled. However, just as he was almost unable to run due to the excess fat in his body, a frivolous voice came from the dark corner of the nearby container. Startled the chubby sheriff. Hi friend, where are you going? Sheriff Fraz suddenly turned back, and Colt in his hand swung towards his back along his body. However, at the same moment, his arm was suddenly lifted by the guy rushing towards him in the darkness. Before his fingers touched the trigger, there was a sharp pain in his wrist, and then the pistol was released. Sheriff Fraser's screams were just remembered and a cold object hit his temple, and then the voice that had become cold rang out again. "Shut up. Your voice is too unpleasant." Mr. Sheriff immediately closed his mouth. Before he could say anything to beg for mercy, he was hit hard on the back of his head with a gun butt. Fraser's eyes rolled and he collapsed to the ground. Saber whistled, put Colt into his pocket, found a spare magazine in Fraser's pocket, and finally pulled out an oily wallet, taking out everything inside. Yes, Saber is very poor. For a guy who currently has nothing in his hands, any spoils of war cannot be spared. However, just as Saber threw the empty wallet to Fraser's side, a whistling sound came from behind his head. Saber's body was lowered outward, and he rolled around on the ground, avoiding the attack from behind. He stood up and quickly put on a fighting posture. Then he saw the attacker. The gunfight in the distance had already stopped when the chubby police officer ran out, and it seemed that the strange guy in front of him had disrupted the situation. He was wearing a strange black armor, not like metal, but rather a special material. He was wearing a black cloak with a black bat emblem on his chest and a black metal belt around his waist. The belt also had the bat emblem, and the most eye-catching thing was his helmet. A black, sturdy-looking, quirky helmet shaped like a bat. Saber squinted his eyes. If this cross-dressing freak wasn't a lunatic, then there was no doubt that this strange outfit was concealing his identity, and from the cold aura emanating from this guy, it seemed that he was a ruthless character. Wow! Is Halloween coming early? Dressed up like this, you're planning to get candy. Saber cautiously took a step back, his left hand touching his pocket where there was a cold gun. He spoke up in an attempt to mock the guy, but just as he retreated, this bastard, who clearly had a special fondness for bats, rushed towards him. Extremely fast. He saw through his plan. Bang, a fierce straight punch, so tasteless, but Saber crossed his arms in front of him, but was still pushed back 3 steps by the punch, causing severe pain in both arms as if they were about to be broken. This guy has so much strength. Who are you? Why are you here? He asked loudly, and the voice was clearly altered, appearing thick and deep, and very intimidating in the darkness. It's none of your business. Saber grinned, moved his arms, clenched his fists, and rushed towards this strangely dressed guy. It was also a plain straight punch, but just as Saber's fist was about to hit this guy's cheek, he was held in his hand by a palm. The Batman's body shook for a moment, and he looked at Saber with a fierce face and questioned loudly, "You killed 5 people. Don't you have anything to say?" "What I want to say is, I have 2 fists." Bang, the left fist was caught, but the right fist exploded in the next moment, hitting the Batman's abdomen and causing him to stumble backwards. At the moment Saber's fist escaped, his left leg swept across and hit the guy's waist, pushing him back 2 steps again. It looked evenly matched, but Saber's expression became even more solemn. There was indeed a problem with his armor. When he punched just now, he felt like he had hit the thick cowhide, at least offsetting 1/3 of his strength. However, this also represents that beneath that peculiar armor, there is only a stronger normal person. As long as it's a person, Saber is not afraid. He moved his wrist, then his head, and finally his shoulders. He took off his coat and threw it on the ground. "Did you see me kill them?" "Sure enough. I felt like someone was spying at the time. It turned out to be you, a transvestite. But how do you plan to punish me? For 5 criminals who are going to kill, Mr. Compulsory Police. It has been 2 days since I arrived in this world, and Saber knows that the people here refer to those urban legendary superheroes as vigilantes. This is not a compliment, but seeing such legendary characters for the first time, Saber felt a little excited in his heart. When a wolf stays with him for a long time, it becomes difficult to disguise himself as a sheep, let alone Saber, who had no intention of disguising himself. In fact, he is willing to accept a small unexpected test without affecting his life. Faced with Saber's mockery, Batman, who had regained his composure, lowered his hands and his gaze toward Saber became even colder under his helmet. This type of attack. Are you a soldier? Seeing that Saber didn't answer, he said again, criminals have their own laws and fair trials, and it's not your turn to execute lynching. Not to mention the death penalty. What's the difference between you and those criminals? Upon hearing these words, Saber felt a wave of contempt and mockery surge from the depths of his heart. Who is this guy? Does he really believe that the law is supporting this indifferent society? Very well, Mr. Justice. Where is the law and justice in your mouth when poor Robin is about to be killed? Criminals should not be forgiven because their actions are an insult to your pitiful sympathy. But you are still defending them. Whoosh, whoosh, Batman did not answer his words. Instead, he answered Saber with 2 flying darts, 2 fingers wide and 1 finger long, very covert. Suddenly, Saber jumped out and dodged the first one, but was shot in the shoulder by the second one. Hiss. Despicable. Seeing Batman had rushed over, he grabbed the dart in his left hand and thrust it into his right arm, pulled it out, threw it on the ground, and then put his hands in front of his head. The storm-like attacks came one after another. In just 3 seconds, Cybor's body lost its balance under the continuous heavy blows. He barely got up from the ground, but what came towards him was a fierce punch that hit his chest. Batman's strength was immense, causing severe pain in Cybor's chest. However, this pain also ignited Cybor's ferocity. He roared, completely out of control, and boldly embraced the waist of this guy with his arms, allowing the punch and elbow to hit his back, like a young thug fighting, like a mad cow, charging forward against Batman. Damn it! Let go of me! Under the almost complete suppression of his frustration, Saber's inner anger was almost indescribable. Before he even realized it, his muscles bulged under the support of anger, and his pain sensation weakened slightly. Batman immediately felt something was wrong. The arms tied around his waist were like iron hoops. This guy seems to have increased his power a bit. It's really tricky. Bang! Saber collided with Batman at the corners of the container, even with the protection of his special fiber armor. Pain still came from behind, and Batman was also hit with anger. His attacks were merciless, and his fists and elbows were like raindrops hitting the ground, hitting Saber's back. And Saber lowered his head, as if he was being held in the arms of a Batman, but his fists mercilessly hit the armor on the Batman's abdomen with each blow. There was a deep bang-bang sound. Just like 2 wild beasts fighting in the darkness, exposing their fangs and seeing blood, the Batman had already entered a frenzied struggle. Even through his armor, he felt a threat. He swung his hands outward, accompanied by 2 clicks. Outside his strange armor, 6 L-shaped blades popped out. He grabbed Cyber's hair, pulled him up, and then crossed his arms across his chest. Obviously, he had no intention of truly harming this somewhat crazy man. The blades were intertwined, only cutting the wound, but it wasn't serious, it was just a skin injury. However, under the threat of the blade, Saber instinctively took a step back, and then was kicked in the chest by the Batman. He stumbled backwards towards the back. However, just as Batman was preparing to pursue the victory, the piercing sirens and chaotic beams of light sounded over the dock area, announcing the end of the fight. Batman glanced at Saber, who was getting up from the ground. He glanced at Saber and whispered, "Be honest, I will keep an eye on you." After speaking, he reached out and took off a strange firearm from behind his waist, pulling the trigger towards the tower crane above his head. The tough steel wire flew out, and just as the Batman was suspended by the steel wire and flew into the package of the night like a Buddha, his hoarse cries also rang out, "Who are you? Tell me." In the darkness, there was no response, only the sound of the siren getting closer and closer. Saber gasped for breath as he looked up at the empty sky above him. He reached out to wipe away the blood stains from the corners of his mouth, his eyes filled with resentment and anger. He reached out to pick up his coat from the ground and then picked up the dart from his feet. He glanced at it and saw that it was a very delicate gadget polished with special metal, with sharp edges at both ends and a dark silver bat shape. There were also 2 letters on one side for identification. BM, Batman. Batman. Great. Saber put the dart stained with his blood into his personal pocket, glanced at the large number of police cars parked in the previous combat area, and then glanced at the chubby sheriff lying on the ground still unconscious. Then, he stumbled and covered the wound on his right arm, charging back towards the direction of the tavern. This trip failed. It's simply humiliation. 10, Chapter 10. A Playboy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The police in Gotham City have always followed a rule. After the gunfight ended, they arrived at the battlefield. Yes, this city was very dangerous. When they were using semi-automatic weapons, the bandits had already started attacking each other with fully automatic weapons. The result of the poor firepower was that they had no way to stop these crazy people from fighting each other. Well, at most after the gunfight, take those who haven't died to the hospital and those who have died to the autopsy room for examination. It's easy and enjoyable, and there's no danger. But tonight, the result of the gunfight that occurred at Gotham Dock was unexpected for all the police officers. There were no casualties, and everyone was tied together and thrown in the corner of the dock. When Sheriff Gordon arrived at the scene with the police officers, some unlucky people didn't wake up. Half of the loading and unloading workers at the dock gathered around to watch the commotion. They were all knocked over on the ground, some were knocked unconscious, and their opponents did not use firearms. Moreover, the firearms they used were thrown aside, but they had all been dismantled. The most deadly thing was that the gang leader Falcone, who arrived at the dock at night to inspect the last batch of goods, was also chained to a searchlight. The shadow cast by the searchlight formed a vague bat-like shape in the air. This is probably the first time a bat's shadow has appeared above Gotham, and no one knows its meaning yet. Sheriff Gordon gave a mocking glance at Falcone, who had just regained consciousness and was still locked in the searchlight, shouting loudly. This once arrogant gang leader now looked like an old lunatic. He no longer looked at his ugliness, but turned his head and walked into the container that had not yet been closed. The cardboard box inside was already filled with half of the space, and Gordon picked up a shoddy teddy bear from the opened box. With a gentle pinch, he discovered the tricks inside. There is a bag of poisonous X hidden there, the evidence is conclusive. Gordon muttered to himself, now as long as there is a prosecutor who dares to sue Falcone, this guy will have to spend some time in prison, which is a good thing, especially for a good police officer like Gordon who is unwilling to collude with Falcone in the normal sense. This means that the entire Gotham will usher in a period of peace. They no longer have to worry about frequent population disappearances and gang fights. Just as Gordon continued to inspect the scene, a police officer ran over panting and said in Gordon's ear, "Mr. Gordon, we found Sheriff Fraser not far away. His pistol was stolen, and John Blake, an intern police officer, was attacked by a mob 2 hours ago and is now seriously injured. He is being treated at Wayne Hospital." What? Robin. When Gordon heard the first news, he didn't react at all. He didn't care about his partner appearing at the crime scene. This guy deserved his life, but the second news made his face change. He threw the teddy bear in his hand into the box and patted the shoulder of the police officer behind him, blocking the scene. "I have informed the prosecutor. Think about your future, Pete. Don't reach out if you shouldn't, Froz is already done. Don't you want to be the sheriff?" After speaking, Gordon walked towards the outside of the dock. He valued his internship assistant Robin, a young and talented intern police officer, very much and had to go and see him. After Gordon left, the young police officer Pete glanced at the doll that Gordon had thrown onto the box, thought of what Falcone had just instructed him, and pondered Gordon's words. He finally gritted his teeth, turned around, and walked out of the container, shouting loudly, "Block the scene. Waiting for the prosecutor to come." When Gordon arrived at Wayne Hospital, it was already 20 minutes later. He walked into the corridor of the emergency room and saw old Christian sitting restlessly in a chair. He quickly walked up. "Dad, Robin." Dad glanced at Gordon, shook his head, and his face was full of pain. He gritted his teeth and cursed, "My son, he's seriously injured. Jamie, that damn bastard. I'm going to kill him. I swear." "Don't worry, Dad, everything will pass." Gordon glanced at the busy emergency room and sat next to his father, who took a deep breath, lowered his voice, and said to Gordon, "My buddy saved Robin, but he accidentally killed those 4 guys. Gordon, I know you're a good police officer, but this time, don't arrest him. Even if it's for Robin, without him, Robin would be dead." Gordon's face changed a few times, and finally he nodded. Dad also breathed a sigh of relief, and then he heard Gordon say, "Falcone fell. He was caught by a mysterious person during the drug X transaction, and the stolen goods were confiscated. As long as he was prosecuted, he would have to stay in prison for a few years, and Jamie would soon be no problem. Don't worry, Dad, I won't let them get away with it." "Okay. Okay." Dad said 2 good things in a row, and then saw the emergency room door pushed open. The tired doctor took off his mask and said to Dad and Sheriff Gordon, who were anxiously waiting, "That child was very lucky to be sent in time, and his life was saved, but it requires at least 1 year of cultivation." "Thank you, Doctor." Dad and Gordon quickly thanked him, and then watched as Robin was pushed out. He had regained his sanity, and Dad held onto his hand tightly. "Child, don't worry, it's all over." Robin struggled to smile at his father and Gordon. The young man was in pain, but he struggled to say to his father, "Thank him for me, Dad. I owe him one." "Well, Saber is a good kid." "I know, you guys are all good kids. Take a break, Robin, stop talking." Gordon still had something to deal with. After seeing that Robin was safe, he returned to the police station, and Dad dragged his tired body back to the bar the next morning. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Saber lying on the floor outside the bar, with blood stains on the side. This scared Dad so much that he quickly walked forward and helped Saber up. He heard his steady and strong breathing, and Dad finally breathed a sigh of relief. He helped Saber to the side of the chair and looked at his clothes, which were covered in traces of blood. On his right shoulder, his coat and shirt were cut open by some sharp weapon, but Dad looked carefully and saw no wounds on Saber's shoulder. This makes Dad a bit puzzled. Since there are no wounds, where did the blood stains on the shirt come from? As he was examining Saber's injuries, the guy who had been sleeping on the floor all night also woke up. He opened his eyes and saw his father with a serious expression on his face. He instinctively called out, "Ah! What are you doing? Crazy old man, stay away from me, Is Robin okay?" Dad knew that this guy was not a big problem when he saw he was awake and still had a poor mouth. However, when he thought about saving his good son last night, Dad's expression relaxed. He casually threw a key to Saber and yawned as he walked up the second floor. "Robin is fine, thank goodness. He asked me to express his gratitude to you. By the way, let's go change into a new set of clothes first. Robin's clothes are left in the first room on the 3rd floor. You can find one yourself, and I will rest for a while. Can you help keep an eye on the store and call me if there is anything you need? Do you understand?" I'm so hungry." Saber weakly waved his hand, then closed the door of the bar. When he saw his father's figure disappear on the 2nd floor, the guy quickly rushed up to the 3rd floor. He opened Robin's house, didn't choose clothes, but instead took off his shirt with a serious expression and looked left and right in front of the dressing mirror. Finally, one thing was confirmed. His muscles were great, his figure was good, and most importantly, he wasn't injured. But last night when I was fighting that damn Batman, a dart pierced his shoulder, and Saber's finger touched the skin on his shoulder. There should have been an open wound there, and he could even feel the faint pain inside, but unfortunately the wound disappeared. What is this? Superpowers. Saibwa Jing stood in front of the mirror with his upper body bare, clenching his left hand into a fist, as if wanting to feel the unique strength in his body. However, after holding this position for 3 seconds, he felt nothing except for his stomach getting even hungry. Damn it. Saber took 2 restless steps back and forth. He didn't like things beyond his control. He casually took out a pair of jeans and a blue T-shirt from Robin's wardrobe. As he changed clothes, his mind quickly reflected on what had happened last night. Finally, looking at himself in the mirror, Saber made up his mind. He took out the dark silver metal bat dart from his hand, rubbed it in his hand, then gestured on his right arm for a few seconds, closed his eyes, gritted his teeth, and swung it hard. Damn it. It hurt so much. 15 minutes later, Saber, with a bandage on his arm, sat at the bar table with a plate of cut sausages and toasted bread, looking displeased. The experiment failed, and he didn't have any superpowers. Even if he was scratched, he would still bleed and hurt. This made him particularly unhappy, but after feeling even hungrier, he gave up these unconventional plans and prepared to have a good sleep after filling his stomach. 3 big sausages and 25 slices of bread were enough to feed 3 adults, but after finishing these things, Saber still felt unsatisfied. While shaving his teeth, his mind was full of wild thoughts. It seems that after coming over, his appetite has increased. Saber looked at the plate licked by the dog and was lost in thought. He didn't have this kind of appetite before. Ding-ling, the doorbell of the bar suddenly rang, interrupting Saber's thoughts. He turned around and glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. At 10:45, who is this point? Are you still those troublemakers? Saibwa stood up and walked to the entrance of the bar, unlocking the lock. Then he saw a guy wearing a provocative silver suit, a tie, hair combed exceptionally neatly, and wearing a pair of big sunglasses standing at the entrance of the bar. With both hands embracing a beautiful girl wearing a cool outfit, Saibwa looked curiously at the opening of the door in their embrace, like a complete playboy. And on the street not far from the bar, there were already many people gathered, watching the stylish limited edition silver-gray Lamborghini parked on the roadside, which shouldn't have appeared here. Saber's gaze withdrew from the car and fell on the guy in front of him. He then casually swept over the 2 women next to him, teasing their heads and asking impatiently, "Hi buddy, who are you?" "Wait, who are you?" "Wayne, I've seen you in the newspaper." The guy across from me raised an eyebrow and said in a gentle voice, "Yes, Bruce Wayne, is Mr. Christian there?" "Let me take a look at the bar that will soon belong to me, old gun." TSK, that's a good name." "Oh." Saber stretched his voice and looked at Bruce Wayne several times before smacking his lips. "Tisk TSK, billionaire, son of Gotham, come on, please come in, Your Highness the Prince. I'm going to call that old man down now, he's been looking forward to you for a long time." After speaking, Saber, yawning, turned around and walked into the bar. In a place he hadn't seen, Bruce Wayne squinted his eyes behind his sunglasses. This guy. The crazy guy who fought last night on the dock. He's actually at this bar too. The young playboy walked into a slightly dim but tastefully decorated bar with one arm around a girl. He looked around and laughed with interest, with some blood still lingering. It seemed like something was interesting.